Hello listeners. Welcome to another podcast on world history. Today I will talk about the Han Dynasty, which falls under the early Chinese dynasties. This content is about to compare the Han Dynasty with the earlier Qin Dynasty, and explain the Western Han period. So, let's get started. The rise of the Han Dynasty. The strong but benevolent Han Dynasty began a golden age of reform and expansion. The first period, called the Western Han, lasted until 9 CE. Formation of the Han Dynasty. By the time the Qin Dynasty collapsed in 207 BCE, 18 separate kingdoms had declared their independence. The Han and Chu states emerged as the most powerful, but the Han state was the victor of the Chu-Han contention, a 4-year civil war. Jiaozhou, who had been born a peasant, founded the Han Dynasty in 202 BCE, reunifying China. The Han Dynasty would become one of the most important and long-lasting dynasties in all of Chinese history. It would rule China for over 400 years, from 206 BCE to 20 CE, and ushered in a golden age of peace, prosperity, and development. Today, both the majority ethnic group in China and Chinese script are called Han. Comparison of Han to Qin. In many ways, the Han carried on policies that began in the Qin. Provincial rule occurred in both, and the Han continued legalist rule, although in much less stricter fashion. Confucianism was banned during the Qin, but resurrected during the Han. The Qin, with its focus on the power of the state, was not shaped by religion in the same way the Han was. The Han were considered with the afterlife, and worshipped their ancestors. Both had defined social classes, but in the Han, peasants were treated with greater respect and classes were based on occupations. The Western Han period and political reform. At first the Han Dynasty established its capital at Chang'an, in western China. This Western Han period would last from 206 BCE to 9 CE, when the dynasty's rule would be briefly interrupted by rebellion and the short-lived Qin Dynasty. Throughout the Western Han period, the Han largely continued the governing policies of the Qin, continuing to expand the bureaucracy and encouraging a centralized state. There were, however, differences between the two dynasties, and it was perhaps these differences that allowed the Han to rule for so much longer than the Qin. The Han were more interested in the lives and well-being of their subjects, and they modified some of the harsher aspects of the earlier dynasty's rule with Confucian ideals of government. Freedom of speech and writing was restored, and the more laissez-faire style of governing allowed harmony, prosperity, and population growth. This period also saw the further development of the four-class hierarchy, called the Four Occupations, which gave aristocratic scholars the highest social status, followed by farmers, then craftsmen and artisans, and finally merchants. The family during this time was patrilineal and featured a small number of nuclear family members. Arranged, monogamous marriages were the norm for most. Sons received equal shares of family property and were often sent away when married. Ritual sacrifices of animals and food were made to deities, spirits, and ancestors at temples and shrines. Each person was seen as having a two-part soul. The spirit soul, which went to the afterlife paradise of immortals, called Xian, and the body soul, which remained in its earthly tomb. Other innovations included the first use of negative numbers in mathematics, the recording of stars and comets, the armillary sphere, which represented star movements in 3 dimensions, the water wheel, and other engineering feats. Emperor Wu. One of the most exalted Han emperors was Emperor Wu, who ruled from 141 to 87 BCE. He was responsible for a great number of innovations and political and military feats. Emperor Wu experimented with socialism, and made Confucianism the single official philosophy. The Confucian classics were reassembled and transcribed. The Confucian ideal of each person accepting his social position helped legitimize the state and made people more willing to accept its power. At the same time, these ideals encouraged the state to act justly toward its people. There was reciprocity too in the fact that the state was funded partly by land taxes, a portion of the harvest, This meant that the prosperity of the agricultural estates determined the prosperity of the Han government. Emperor Wu also founded great government industries and transportation and delivery services, developed governmental control of profit, and imposed a 5% income tax. He created civil service examinations to test potential government officials on their knowledge of the Confucian classics, so that bureaucrats would be chosen for their intelligence instead of their social connections. Emperor Wu also reformed the Chinese economy and nationalized the salt and iron industries, and he initiated reforms that made farming more efficient. Through Emperor Wu's southern and western conquests, the Han Dynasty made contact with the Indian cultural sphere. Emperor Wu repelled the invading barbarians, the Xiongnu, or Huns, a nomadic pastoralist warrior people from the Eurasian steppe, and roughly doubled the size of the empire, claiming lands that included Korea, Manchuria, and even part of Turkestan. As China pushed its borders further, trade contacts were established with lands to the west, most notably via the Silk Road. Challenges during the Western Han period. Nonetheless, the Han faced many challenges. Emperor Jiaozi rewarded his supporters with grants of land, which started again the same problems that had brought down the Zhou dynasty. Several rebellions broke out, the most serious of which was the Rebellion of the Seven States. Nonetheless, the Han emperors stamped out the rebellions and gradually reduced the power of the small kingdoms, though never abolished them completely. Another major danger to the Han was the external threat of the barbarians, the most dangerous of whom were the Huns. However, the Han dynasty was able to face these internal and external threats and survive because of the strong centralized state they had established. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out other tracks as well. Show your love by hitting the subscribe button and do like, comment and share, to spread knowledge. See you next time. Till then, keep learning for fun.